What happens when a royal sits down for what should be a routine morning show interview, only to have the host push boundaries that were never meant to be crossed? Today we're diving into an explosive confrontation that left Prince Harry storming, offset, producers scrambling, and viewers witnessing one of the most uncomfortable moments in television history. This isn't your typical celebrity interview gone wrong. This is something far more personal and far more devastating. Before we get into it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really triggered this meltdown. The morning started like any other at the popular talk show studio. Prince Harry had agreed to appear, alongside hosts Jenna and her co-hosts, to discuss his latest charitable initiatives and upcoming projects. What seemed like a safe, pre-approved topic list quickly devolved into something neither the production team nor Harry himself saw coming. "So Harry, let's talk about your work with veterans," Jenna began, her signature warm smile in place as cameras rolled live across the nation. "Your Invictus Games have been such an incredible success." Harry nodded, seeming comfortable in his chair. "Thank you, Jenna. It's been 7 years since we launched the games, and seeing these wounded warriors compete, seeing them reclaim their lives, it never gets old. These men and women have sacrificed everything for their countries." Speaking of sacrifice, Jenna's co-host Marcus interjected, "A lot of people have been wondering about your own sacrifices. You've given up your royal duties, moved across the ocean, started a new life. Do you ever regret those choices?" The question hung in the air for just a moment too long. Harry's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his media training kicked in. "I don't think of them as sacrifices, Marcus. I think of them as choices. Difficult choices, but necessary ones for my family's well-being." "Your family's well-being," Jenna repeated, leaning forward slightly. "That's interesting phrasing, because from the outside it looks like those choices have created quite a bit of distance between you and your family back home." "Every family goes through challenges," Harry replied carefully. "The important thing is that we're building something positive, something that aligns with our values." "But surely you miss certain aspects of your old life," Marcus pressed. "The traditions, the ceremonies, being part of something that's been going on for over 1,000 years." Harry shifted in his seat. "I miss elements of it, certainly, but I don't miss the constraints, the inability to speak truthfully about issues that matter." Truthfully, Jenna seized on the word. "That's something you've talked about a lot in recent years, the importance of truth, of your truth. But some people might argue that truth can be subjective, especially when it comes to family dynamics." "I'm not sure what you're getting at," Harry said, his voice carrying a slight edge now. "Well, you've been very vocal about your experiences, your perspective on events. But there are always multiple sides to every story, aren't there? Other people who were present who might remember things differently." The temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees. Harry's media-trained smile was becoming more forced by the second. "I've always been careful to speak only about my own experiences," he said slowly. Of course, Jenna nodded sympathetically. "But when those experiences become public, when they're shared in books and interviews and documentaries, they inevitably affect other people. People who maybe can't respond in the same way, who have different obligations, different constraints." Marcus jumped back in. "Speaking of constraints, there's been a lot of speculation about certain conversations, certain alleged comments that may or may not have been made. Without getting into specifics, how do you handle situations where your recollection of events might differ from others who were present?" Harry's hands gripped the arms of his chair slightly tighter. "I think everyone should be able to tell their story. That's what I've done, and I stand by it." "But what about accountability?" Jenna asked, her tone still friendly, but with an underlying sharpness. "What about the possibility that in sharing our truth, we might inadvertently misrepresent someone else's intentions or actions?" "Are you suggesting I've lied about something?" Harry asked directly, his voice low but clear. "Not at all," Jenna replied quickly, raising her hands. "I'm just exploring the complexity of memory, of perspective, especially in emotionally charged situations." "Emotionally charged," Harry repeated. "That's an interesting way to describe some of the most painful moments of my life." The live audience was completely silent now, sensing the growing tension. Camera operators adjusted their shots, capturing every micro-expression. "Harry, I think what we're trying to understand," Marcus said, attempting to sound reasonable. is how you balance your desire to share your truth with your responsibility to the institution you were born into, to the family that raised you. The family that raised me, Harry said, his voice barely above a whisper, also failed to protect me in ways that matter. They failed to protect my wife. They failed to learn from what happened to my mother. Jenna's eyes lit up. She knew they were approaching something explosive. Your mother, she said carefully. You've spoken about how the press treatment of your wife reminded you of what your mother went through, but some might argue that the situations were quite different. Your mother was dealing with marital problems, public scrutiny of her relationships, whereas your wife was navigating the challenge of joining an ancient institution with very specific protocols. Harry's face went completely still. I'm sorry, are you comparing my wife's treatment to my mother's personal struggles? I'm not comparing anything, Jenna said. I'm just trying to understand your perspective on these parallels you've drawn. My perspective, Harry said, his voice gaining strength and anger, is that both the women I've loved most in this world were systematically destroyed by the same machine, the same people who smile at you in public and brief against you in private. But, Harry, Marcus interjected, surely you can see how some people might feel that's a rather serious accusation to make against your own family members. Harry turned to look directly at Marcus, his eyes flashing. Serious accusation? You want to talk about serious accusations? Let's talk about the stories that were planted about my wife while she was pregnant. Let's talk about the complete silence when she was being torn apart in the press. Let's talk about the refusal to correct blatant lies because it might temporarily benefit someone else's narrative. The studio fell into an uncomfortable silence as Harry's words hung in the air. Jenna exchanged a quick glance with Marcus, both realizing they had pushed further than anticipated, but neither willing to back down now. Harry, Jenna said, her voice taking on a more serious tone, those are very specific allegations you're making. When you say stories were planted, briefings were given, are you talking about official palace communications, or are you suggesting something more coordinated? Harry let out a bitter laugh. Official palace communications. That's rich. You think there's a difference? You think when a senior royal's private secretary calls a journalist and suggests they look into a particular angle, that's somehow separate from the institution. But surely you understand, Marcus said, leaning forward, that all public figures, all institutions, have communication strategies. That's just modern media management. Media management, Harry repeated, shaking his head. Is that what you call it when they throw a pregnant woman under the bus to protect someone else's bad week? When they let racist undertones go unchallenged because addressing them might be inconvenient? Jenna's eyebrows raised slightly. Racist? Undertones? That's a strong word, Harry. Can you be more specific about what you mean by that? Harry stared at her for a long moment, and viewers could practically see him weighing his options. You know exactly what I mean. The coverage of my wife from day one was different. The language used, the assumptions made, the stories chosen to highlight. And when we tried to address it, we were told we were being too sensitive, that this was just normal press scrutiny. But Harry, Marcus interjected, the British press has always been tough on royal family members. Your brother and his wife faced intense scrutiny too, especially in their early years. How do you differentiate between standard press attention and something more targeted? Harry's hands clenched into fists. Standard press attention. You want? To compare the coverage, let's compare headlines. Let's compare the language used when my sister-in-law held her pregnant belly versus when my wife did the same thing. Let's compare the reaction when my sister-in-law was emotional versus when my wife showed any human feeling whatsoever. That's an interesting point, Jenna said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. But couldn't some of that difference be attributed to other factors? Different circumstances, different timing, different public moods, different skin color. Several audience members audibly gasped. The camera operators seemed frozen, unsure whether to zoom in or pull back. Jenna recovered first. Harry, that's a very serious allegation to make on live television. It's not an allegation, Harry replied, his voice steady now, almost calm. It's an observation. And if you're uncomfortable hearing it, said plainly, imagine how uncomfortable it was living it. Marcus cleared his throat. But Harry, surely you can understand how some people might feel that, playing the race card, so to speak, might seem like an easy way to dismiss legitimate criticism or normal press attention. Harry turned to stare at Marcus with an expression that could have frozen fire. Playing the race card. Did you just say playing the race card? I didn't mean it that way, Marcus said quickly, clearly realizing his mistake. No, I think you meant it exactly that way, Harry said, his voice rising for the first time, because that's what people say when they want to dismiss the reality of what happened, when they want to pretend that centuries of institutional racism just magically disappeared because it's inconvenient to acknowledge. Jenna tried to regain control. Harry, I think what Marcus was trying to say is that it's difficult for viewers to know where legitimate criticism ends and prejudice begins. How do we make that distinction? How do you make that distinction? Harry asked incredulously. Start by believing the people who are actually experiencing it. You start by looking at the patterns, the language, the double standards. You start by asking why a woman who dedicated her life to humanitarian work was treated like a manipulative outsider from the moment she appeared in my life. But surely, Marcus said, seeming to have recovered his composure. You can understand that marrying into the royal family comes with certain expectations, certain protocols. Maybe some of the criticism was about how those expectations were being met, rather than about personal characteristics. Harry stood up so abruptly that his chair rolled backward. Expectations, protocols. She followed every single protocol. She learned the history. She studied the Commonwealth. She threw herself into every role they gave her. And you know what? She got for it. Stories about her making people cry when she was the one being made to cry. Stories about her being difficult when she was being isolated. Stories about her being demanding when she was literally asking for help. Jenna remained seated, but her posture had become more rigid. Harry, these are very serious accusations you're making about how the palace operates, about how the press functions. Do you have specific examples you can share? Specific examples? Harry laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want specific examples? How about the time a story ran claiming my wife had reduced a staff member to tears when the reality was the complete opposite? How about the coordinated timing of negative stories that mysteriously appeared whenever someone else in the family was having a bad news cycle? How about the complete silence from the palace when lies were being spread, but the immediate corrections that would come out when stories affected other family members? Those are very specific allegations. Marcus said carefully, "Can you prove any of that happened?" Harry took a step toward the desk where the hosts were seated. "Can I prove it? I lived it. My wife lived it. We have emails, we have text messages, we have recorded conversations. We have documentation of every request for help that was ignored, every plea for protection that was dismissed." The tension in the studio was now palpable. Security personnel could be seen at the edges of the camera frame, clearly unsure whether they should intervene. "Harry," Jenna said, her voice taking on a more cautious tone, "you're making some very serious allegations. About your family, about the institution. Are you sure you want to go down this path on live television?" "Are you threatening me?" Harry asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Not at all," Jenna replied quickly. "I'm just suggesting that once certain things are said publicly, they can't be taken back. Relationships can be permanently damaged." Harry stared at her for a long moment. "You think my relationships aren't already permanently damaged? You think there's some way back from watching your wife contemplate suicide, while the people who are supposed to protect you actively work to destroy her? You think there's some way back from being told that your wife and child's security isn't a priority because they're not senior enough in the line of succession. Security concerns are obviously serious," Marcus said, "but surely those decisions are made based on threat assessments and available resources rather than personal feelings." "Available resources," Harry repeated slowly. "You know what's interesting? About available resources, they always seem to be available when it comes to protecting the reputation of certain family members. They always seem to be available when it comes to managing certain scandals. But when it comes to protecting a pregnant woman from death threats, suddenly resources are limited." Jenna leaned back in her chair slightly. "Death threats are obviously unacceptable, but surely the police handle those kinds of security issues. Rather than the royal family directly, the police handle what they're asked to handle," Harry said, his voice growing stronger. "And when the palace decides that your security isn't a priority, when they decide that you're not worth protecting, The police get that message loud and clear. The studio audience was completely silent now, many visibly uncomfortable as they watched the interview spiral into territory no one had anticipated. Harry remained standing, his chest rising and falling with barely controlled emotion. "Harry," Jenna said, trying to project calm authority despite the chaos unfolding, "I think we need to take a step back here. You're making allegations that could have serious legal ramifications." "Legal ramifications?" Harry's voice cracked slightly. "You want to talk about legal ramifications? How about the legal ramifications of a coordinated campaign to destroy someone's mental health? How about the legal ramifications of institutional racism? How about the legal ramifications of putting a price on someone's life based on their position in a hereditary hierarchy?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Harry, with respect, you're talking about your own family here. These are people who raised you, who love you. Surely there's some middle ground, some way to acknowledge that mistakes might have been made without suggesting deliberate malice." Harry turned to face Marcus directly, his eyes blazing. "Love me? You think people who love you stand by while your wife is driven to the point of wanting to end her own life? You think people who love you refuse to have conversations about the safety of your mixed-race child? You think people who love you brief journalists against your wife while she's carrying your grandchild?" "But Harry," Jenna interjected, clearly trying to regain some semblance of control. "Surely you understand that the royal family operates within certain constraints. They can't respond to every piece of press coverage. They can't get involved in every controversy." "Constraints," Harry said, laughing bitterly. "There are no constraints when it comes to protecting the heir. There are no constraints when it comes to managing certain family members' scandals. There are no constraints when it comes to briefing positive stories about whoever needs their image polished that week. But suddenly, there are constraints when it comes to protecting my wife and child." "You keep talking about briefings," Marcus said, his tone becoming more challenging. "But these are serious accusations. Are you saying that senior members of your family personally called journalists to plant negative stories about your wife?" Harry paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "I'm saying that the system is designed to protect certain people at the expense of others. And when that system decided my wife was expendable, my family chose the system over us. That's a very serious accusation to make against your father, your brother," Jenna said. "My father? Do you know what my father said when I told him about the racist coverage my wife was receiving? He said, that's just how the press works. When I told him about the death threats, he said we all get them. When I begged him to do something, anything, to protect his daughter-in-law and grandchild, he said it wasn't his place to interfere with press freedom. The studio was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening. And your brother?" Marcus asked quietly. Harry's face contorted with pain and anger. "My brother chose his future crown over his current brother. He chose protecting the institution over protecting the woman who was carrying his nephew. He chose silence when he could have spoken up, because speaking up might have been inconvenient for his own image.